Vicky's story. We are all planners. We plan for our future from childhood. We plan our careers, our relationships, weddings, houses, and even plan for our children's lives. We all have big hopes and dreams for our lives, but have you considered how you want to die? In this episode, we talk with Vicky about planning for a good death. This is in regard to dying a good death. Vicky is passionate about life, love, and death. She is a retired kindergarten grade 1 teacher who loved her career. Looking back on her life, she would have loved to have spent more time supporting those in end-of-life care. Vicky is open and passionate about death and the groundwork required to pass peacefully. We sat down with Vicky to talk about all things death, where she told us the story of the first time she was introduced to death.
How was death described to you?
I don't remember. It is interesting, however, that the first time I ever saw my mom cry, my dad explained she needed to be left alone and not to worry. Something sad had happened and her mom had passed away. And I remember it just because my mom never cried. And it was a jarring to me as a child. And then we were not allowed to go to the funeral. I'd never thought about that. There were no children at the funeral, as per my mom's request. So that was my introduction. Grandma was gone and Mom was sad and we got a babysitter. I think for lots of people, the first death is a pet. And in my brother's and my life, there was a pet that was beloved and certainly beloved by my dad's shadow. But my dad wasn't coping with the dog getting older at all. So if you can believe it, an extreme family, Mom and Dad's first trip to Europe, they saved up, they got on an airplane, and my mom said, in 2 hours, you can drive the dog down to the vet and put the dog down. And we're going to be gone 5 weeks. And we'll explain that to Dad when he lands. And that would be my next. But I will also tell you that as a kindergarten grade 1 teacher, my next introduction to death was a little girl in grade 1. I used to do little journals talking about how children felt they what they were learning and how it made them feel and what was important about their learning. And we did that. It's called metacognition, talking about your own learning. And early on in it, this little girl who just learned to read and write started to tell me that her dad was dying in this journal and that he was drinking and that Mom couldn't make him stop and she couldn't make him stop. And one day he was going to die. And, I'm kind of like, okay. I would write back little questions. And at some point I phoned the mom and said, look, you need to know that this is what's happening. Oh, I'm fine with that. He is going to die and he's going to die very quickly. Okay. So that went on for, several months. And I kind of started reading about how to help children who were going to go through loss. And when I retired, I probably had 40 books for young children. And I would send home packages. Grandma died. Here's a package to take home and Mom can read you some stories and Dad can talk to you. And anyway, she was the beginning of that for me. And if you can believe it, talking about the experience of your first introduction to death, knock on the door just before noon one day. It's Grandma. And I opened the door and the grandma could see the child. And Grandma said, your dad died. You need to come home. And I said, okay. Uh, and I kind of took the child out, and she said to the grandma, I knew he was going to die, and I'm not going home. I want to stay here. So she did. So I've had some really interesting experiences with death.
In North America, death and dying isn't a popular conversation topic. Many believe even speaking of death will curse you, or that is just too morbid to talk about. But up until the end of the 19th century, it was normal to die at home and to have your family take care of the whole process.
I'm concerned about North American culture. From my point of view, our whole lives, from birth to death, is the life cycle. And we're wonderful with birth and babies and schooling and living our lives. And we get to the other end of the life cycle. And in North America, we really have a hard time talking about death in any real shape. Yes, you'll find few people who are comfortable and want to talk about it. But many people, in fact, a friend I was telling I was going to do this interview with you 2 nights ago said, oh, nothing could be more morbid. I don't even want you to tell me what you're going to talk about. And I said, and that's why I need to talk. We need to start talking. We've lost all of our wisdom about that part of our cycle. And it should be just simply natural and part of the cycle. Even as early as the 20s and 30s in a lot of the world, but certainly in the 1800s, the whole family lived together. There were no retirement homes, so mom and dad grew older, and the family looked after them, and babies were born in the house, and people died in the house. It was part of the natural life cycle, and often the doctor would come. Yes, grandpa has passed away, and the family would move the body down into an area and lay the person out, put them in their best clothes. And for a period of time, I don't know how long, the family would be able to be with the person who'd passed away, and visitors could come. And often it was the dining room table because it was long enough for an adult. And there was often space around it for people to come. But you can imagine that if everybody's living in the same home or two homes close together, that as the person dies, there would be people in the room with them, people talking to them, grandchildren sitting on the end of the bed, the dog licking your face. You weren't away in a hospital or in a retirement home like with what's gone on with the pandemic. My mom died alone in her dying process. I couldn't help her. We did get in for the last 10 minutes of her life, and she waited. There is no question. But going back to what happened earlier on, all of us understood the life cycle, and we were all part of it. We were united together. And if you were lucky, you were in a happy, normal home where the conversations in the room where you were dying were as normal and natural as anything else. You know, a child coming in with a drumstick from the dinner table to talk to grandma. That's lost to us. And the wisdom around understanding how to cope or how to explain things. We used to know how to do that to help little ones. Now, you could have a catastrophic illness, be in the hospital, have your doctor looking after you, and your kids come to see you, and they don't want you to say you're dying. You know you're dying, but oh no, we're not talking about that. There's hope. There's no ability often for some people to reach out and say, I really love you. I'm so sorry. Do you remember the time when such and such happened? I just want you to know before I'm gone, I'm sorry that happened. Or I really want you to know that I've left you lots of things, but I want the locket Dad gave me to go with me. You know, those true last moments, and often people aren't allowed to have them because the family says, we're not talking about this. There's hope.
Even though she is not formally trained in end-of-life care, Vicki saw 16 loved ones pass away. Some of those deaths were beautiful and peaceful. Regrettably, some deaths were sad and lonely. But this has created a passion that has pushed her to help others think and prepare for their journey to death.
This dying a good death passion that I have now is because I watched both. I watched people in our family that we loved dying a good death, and I watched people who didn't at all, who were very agitated and very upset. So for me, to answer that question, dying a good death is making sure that in this day and age, in our family, that our three girls, and most importantly, the child that we've asked to look after us, we've deemed one child the one that's more likely than the others to be comfortable. I've made a binder, and in the binder is, in the event of a catastrophic crash and Dad and I are gone together, this is what we would like. If one of us gets sick and it's going to be a long time that we're going to be ill, this is what I would like. I think you can pre-plan a good death. I don't want to be held on by life support. Please don't do that. And please don't worry if someone says, should you pull the plug? I have that written down. Dad and I both don't want to live that way. So we have in our good death plan, what happens in the event of a surprise, what happens if we don't seem to notice we really need more help. For Tony and I, we have at this point decided we have a level entry home, flat, not even a step up, it's level entry. And we have a full basement we wouldn't be using in our 80s, that we would hire people to come to us and we can stay in our home. That way we can have a puppy or a kitty or because that's important to us. And because my second career was an art agent, I have beautiful, beautiful artwork. And I'll be surrounded by that. And my husband is an avid reader, and he'll be surrounded by all his books for as long as he wants them. We've described that in intimate detail to our kids. And then at the end, no regrets, guys. Once we have to go to full care, we want to be together in one room. Don't put us somewhere where we can't be together in one room. Bring my favorite painting to be with me and bring Dad's books. And if the dog can come, awesome. It's going to be laid out. That's living a good death and allowing your life story to happily continue as long as possible. Yes, there's going to be pain. Yes, you're going to lose your memory as you go along. Things aren't going to be perfect, but you refocus the positives that are left till you get to, I'm in bed, and maybe today's the day I'm going. I want to see my kids. I want to be surrounded by love, and I want that visual beauty because it's important to me. That's living a good death. It doesn't mean you're going to have everything. You're not going to Maui to live a good death. Do you know what I mean? So that's what I learned. And I think because I have a faith, which we haven't talked about, but in the living a good death, the people I observed who lived and died peacefully, almost always, I'm not saying they had a religion, but all of them believed they were going to a better place. The journey was simply beginning again, a new journey. Yes, we don't know how it's going to kind of work out, but we believe it's going to. So for me and for Tony, part of our living a good death includes we're just moving into the next part of our lives.
Well, what a gift to give your children and your family. The gift of not questioning, the gift of like getting to just fulfill your wishes, because sometimes that's all you have left when you have someone that's passing away and getting older is to be able to fulfill their wishes. That's all you have left to give them. And that's a really special thing that you're giving your children, right? That's like the magic, because there's nothing worse than not being able to give them that peace of mind that they're
and
fulfilling
not knowing what they want.
Yeah,
right?
That's a good death. I love that you talk about faith, because the world is shifting from a faith perspective. There is devout, and then there's confusion, and then there's unknown. And I love that you leave room for people who don't necessarily know. They can still die a good, peaceful, calm death just by having faith that they're going somewhere better. Yeah. Somewhere different, somewhere at all. Isn't that, I guess, we leave space for them to still be able to peacefully go somewhere.
It's true. In one of our family members, just because I'm me, my auntie, I said to her, you're not well. Now, she was fighting it, and she was just fine. She was going to be just fine. You're not well, auntie, and I'm just wondering, do you think you're going to go to heaven? Is there a heaven for you in your belief system? Well, I don't talk about those kinds of things. I don't think that's necessary. I said, well, I agree. If you're uncomfortable, then it's unnecessary to talk about it. I just hope that in your quiet moments when there's nobody here with you, that you are thinking and planning for seeing grandma and grandpa and the people who've gone before you, because they're waiting for you. I'm sure they are. Oh, well, I believe that. Good. I'm glad you do, because that's something in your quiet moments to think about.
Sometimes we are called upon to use our gifts to serve others. Vicci was honored to walk alongside many during their final days and provide comfort and care selflessly.
My sister-in-law and I both read Being Mortal, if you haven't heard about it. It's a wonderful book, and she was right there with me. She could see what was happening in the family, and I had somebody to bounce it off of. My brother has always been a huge support to me in a silent, strong silent. I'm the talker in our family, and he's the strong, silent guy. But I think that my brother and I and sister-in-law were left in this group because we were a good united team, and we had the ability to work together to support people. And I think that God or the cosmos just said, yeah, let's leave them there. I think this group of people might need them. And I felt I was so lucky that I had retired. And I have a motto in my life, and that is live with no regrets. Do what you need to do, no matter who pressures you. And it was hard because sometimes it was my husband. I would be at the hospital. There were times when three at a time were in the hospital, and my brother or I had gone with them to admit them. And then I'd just go up and down the elevator between people. And then my mom would be at home on her own. The dog would be in another house on her own. And my husband would come home having not seen me in days. And there was some pressure there. But after people passed away, he said to me, that was wrong, Vicki. You did exactly what you needed to do. And now I didn't grieve heavily. I'm sad. I think about the people I've lost, but I didn't grieve heavily. I did everything My brother did everything. My sister did everything we could. And our minister at the church, Steve Fillick, he was right there with us all the way through. It was, we all held hands together, and it just worked. It was meant to be that way.
That's something to touch on, though. I did palliative care for my mom right until the day she left for 2 years straight. And it was hard on my marriage. That's a spot to touch on, is our husbands aren't doing the palliative care because they're running the home front. They're paying the bills so that we can be there, and we can. So that is something to touch on, that it's not all warm and fuzzy while people are dying. There's people that are left behind that we're caring while we're caring for the ones to get ready for the next world and seeing them off.
I think it's fair. I think it's real.
Yeah.
And I also think that the supporters need support.
Yeah.
And, or the helpers need help.
Yes.
And the one thing Tony did that was wonderful was at least 2 or 3 times a week, he'd say, what do you need me to do right now? And sometimes I'd come home and I'd just say, make me a drink.
Yeah.
It's because I'm too tired. I'm too tired to eat dinner. I want to have a drink. I'm going to go to bed. And just sit and talk with me. And we don't need to talk about mom or dad or who's ill. And of course, once everybody passed away, we were the executors to many wills because my auntie and uncle had never married. My brother and I never thought that, it never occurred to us we'd be looking after them. Just kind of there it was. And then, of course, we were the executors. So life was pretty overwhelming for 2.5 years. I'm only just relaxing now.
In Vicky's reading and studying on death, she found some wonderful resources not only to encourage, but to educate our perception of death.
The book is Being Mortal by Atul Gawande, and he's a physician. And he talks a lot about the fact that doctors aren't taught to talk about death. And they're taught to keep you alive. Their job is to keep you alive. Their job isn't to support your soul or talk to you about God or actually do anything beyond giving you advice on how best to keep you alive. Over many years, he started to realize, this isn't working the way I thought it. I need to start supporting my patients in different ways. And sometimes giving them another operation isn't going to help them. It may actually prolong their life in pain. Well, my auntie very clearly told the surgeon, she had cancer, that she had not allowed anybody to treat. She didn't want to be treated. She just wanted to live till she died. And at some point, the pain was too much. She ended up in hospital. And lovely surgeon, the surgeon said to her, we can fix this. This time, this is fixable. So I'd be happy to go in and fix this. And my auntie said to her, you're guaranteeing me it can be fixed and I can live pain-free and et cetera, et cetera. Yes. So as her support system, my brother and I, and my dad was alive at that time and he was in the hospital. So he just went down, we all talked, and that's what we were going to do. So off she went. Well, she came back to the floor with a colostomy and she was near death and ended up in the ICU for weeks and in terrible pain with the thing down her throat and the whole bit. And the look on her face was fury. It is not what she wanted. And it was a step too far, and I hadn't read the book. I didn't have a grounding in listen to what the person who's very ill wants. So I was still in the let's fix her mode. I would never do that again. I believe most people know when they're dying. They know it from somewhere deep in their soul. And if they say, I don't want anything, just give me pain meds. My mom got to that point and I really encouraged it. By then I'd read the book and I really encouraged it. And her last few months, very few meds, just keeping her comfortable. So from that point of view, she was happy. But the fact that it was the pandemic and we couldn't get to her, and she had my brother and I 2 or 3 times a day, every day for the last 3 years she was alive. She could not understand what happened, and that's what killed her. She got so confused that she tripped and fell.
It is important to know how you want your end of life to look like. Do you know what is most important to your spouse? How about your parents? The end of life talk is a hard one, but it is important. Vicky attempted to discuss her mother's wishes.
So Mom was in the hospital. Things were winding down. I had read the book. My sister-in-law and I, the summer before, had tried to talk to her about planning a good death. You're trying to kill me. I don't want to talk about this. You're trying to kill me. Mom, we're not trying to kill you. We're actually trying to help you. We want to know what you would like as you become more frail and more ill. How can we help you the best? And her answer was always the same. There were buildings in Kamloops she did not want to go near. Period, full stop. And I'm not going to name names. That's not fair to the staff and the people that are there. But she had a clear idea of where she wanted to go. And so in her world, Kamloops Seniors Village was where she needed to go because she wasn't allowed to go back to independent living at Berwick. Okay, so that's great. If we'd had a plan, I would have gotten met the people. My brother could have gone with me. We could have pre-planned her having a spot. But no, it's Christmas. Mom's been in the hospital a month and the doctors are saying she can't stay. She's got to move into full care immediately. Okay, well, that's great. It's Christmas. Doctors are on holiday. The people in the care homes are on holiday. And there's no room anywhere. So long story short, I decided on a plan of action, which is something I do in my life. And that is, I'm going to go every morning to Kamloops Seniors Village and I'm going to stand at the front desk and I'm going to say, and today do you have a place my mom could come to? So that when I got to the hospital, I could say to them, I'm looking. I'm only looking in one place. There's only one place my mom will go, but I'm looking. And I don't know, about 10 days in, they were basically saying they were going to put Mom in an ambulance and take her to one of the places she didn't want to go. And I arrived on their doorstep and the gal looked up and by then they knew my name and oh man. And she said, there just is nothing. And I burst into tears. And the lady who organized all of the placements of people came around the corner. She said, I knew you'd be here today. I knew you'd come. She said, I talked them into opening a room that's been closed. And she said, because you obviously are in a terrible position. I said, well, they're going to put her in an ambulance and take her home. And it was not perfect. My mom didn't allow us the chance to plan. But I think it's really important for folks to understand that if you aren't going to stay in your own home and pay for help in your own home as you become older and less able to look after yourself, if you're not prepared to do that, and if you haven't told your family so they don't understand what you want to do, you're going to end up somewhere. Often it's independent living first. where you look after yourself within the four walls of a building that will feed you wonderful meals and clean your unit. But basically, you're on your own. And my mom and dad did really well in that situation for about 5 years. Then my dad died. And I learned something pretty quickly after dad died. Yes, mom was in grief. I was in grief. We were losing people left, right, and center in our family. But very quickly, my mom now was sitting alone because she had very poor mobility. So she was sitting alone for hours a day, up at 5:30 in the morning, into her chair, watching TV. She was bored, she was lonely, and she was helpless. And my husband kept saying, she's not really helpless because she could get in her little motorized wheelchair and go out and find people. But she was grieving. She didn't want to be where there were people. So she only had my brother and I to draw on, and that was tough. So you have to understand that once you get to that place in your life cycle, if you want to continue living a good life, you've got to have plans for all of that. So mom ended up going from Berwick to the hospital, and Berwick, rightly so, wouldn't allow her back. She needed more help. So only because I cried, they gave me something, and mom ended up there. And thank you, God. They saw how ill she was. She was sort of in their independent side, waiting for a full care bed. And 2 days before they locked down for the pandemic, they allowed us to move her into a room. And she was the last person in to full care before the pandemic hit. And we didn't see mom again awake, right? Because she'd fallen. This is now 6 weeks later. She'd fallen. She was so upset. She wasn't seeing us. She was helpless and lonely. And she was frightened, and she didn't understand why we couldn't come and help her. So that whole thought about nursing homes is really important, and it's part of my passion. It is okay if that's what you want. And we all have things that'll make us happy, and they get smaller and smaller as we get older and older, right? And my mom was surrounded by all the things she loved except my brother and I. If she'd had my brother and I actually believe she'd still be alive. Yeah. She lost her touch to reality. We had people coming into her unit several times a week, her friends. Like, we would go pick friends up and bring them. Like, we were really quite committed to keeping her mind active. But once nobody could go in, it was gone, right? Maybe one of the most wonderful things I did with my mom and dad, they were into Berwick. They weren't happy to move there, I should tell you. It was my brother and I worrying about them being safe that they ended up there. But once they were there, they acclimatized and made friends. And they were really lucky. They had about a 600 square foot deck out that mom could get out with her wheelchair and all. And my mom and dad and I, not my brother, he was still working, for 2 years, happy hours, about once a month. I did happy hour with them almost every day, but about once a month for 2 years, we wrote the funeral plans. They prepaid their funeral. They prepaid their plot where they wanted to be. I knew that part of their good death. But I had a wonderful time with them because we had a little book to follow, and I had one for dad and one for mom, and we always worked on the same questions. And one time dad would go first and mom could listen and think about what she was going to answer. And sometimes it went the other way. So that when they were gone, we had the ability to write eulogies based on quotes I had written that they had answered. I even have a videotape of my mom reading a Bible passage that she wanted and then explaining why it was important to her. which, because it was a pandemic, I surprised the family with Mom reading her own Bible passage because it was on Zoom, right? It was fun. And everybody loved that. But that part of the talking about death was fine for her. But it was too late once Dad was gone to try and help her plan the rest. She was not having it. So I really, in a fair world, I would go back to those afternoons at Berwick talking about the funerals. They were perfectly planned. I even knew who was making the sandwiches.
Vicki has also planned her own funeral, in hopes it will make it easier for her family for when her time comes.
And it is part of the planning I have in the binder for the kids. They won't have to worry about the hymns or the Bible passages or who we want to do our eulogy. I've already asked the person I want to do my eulogy. She already knows. And she says, don't expect me to be really nice. I have some really good stories I'm going to tell. And that's what I want. I want the person who knows me that way to be the one. And I don't want my kids to feel like they have to do that. So yes, there is a point, and I think now I can pinpoint it for other people, and I would quietly say something in people's ears now, because there seems to be a time when it's more copacetic. Before, maybe there's a fear of dying. And I think Mom was really knowing that things were sliding downhill. I think she really wanted to die. I think she was ready to die. But I think there was also a fear factor. And all her response to Kathy and I was, "You're trying to kill me." We're not.
No.
Death cafes are starting to become more popular in recent years. A death cafe is a comfortable place to talk about death, from sharing about losing a loved one to planning your own funeral. In Kamloops, working alongside her pastor Steve Feelick, they have started a local death cafe.
Steve at the church and I have been doing some death cafes, and that's another thing. Whether you understand what a death cafe is or not, it does not matter. It's simply talking about death in an unstructured way. If you feel that need to want to talk, I have set up in my own planning people that my kids could call if I'm talking about or wanting to talk and they're talked out. I got to tell you, I'm sure you experienced some of that too, where you were so exhausted, you need to get home to your own family and your own life, even if it's only for 2 hours. There has to be a list of people your kids can go to and their phone numbers. Phone Sally down the block because she'd love to come and talk to me for an hour. That kind of thing. I would feel terrible. And I know of people who were not able to talk about what was important to them at the end because their family didn't want to or were too exhausted to. So a death cafe is somewhere with comfortable seating, cake, tea, and talk. So you're looking after people's creature comforts in that they can hold a warm cup of coffee or tea and eat something if they're anxious. And they can listen if they want, and they can speak if they want. And we had a game plan we tried let's just see who says what. Let's open it up. Would anybody like to jump in? Seeing no one, because they didn't know what to expect either. So here we were with about 25 people, and Steve and I had planned for that. So what we did was we divided people into smaller groups, and we had a talking stick, and we had, being a primary teacher, we had written out questions, and we just laid a question in the middle of the table. And that worked really well for us. We started our own format. So in the world of death cafes, I'm sure that the originators would be disappointed with us. But we really felt that we needed something to hang on to. So that's how it started. And we only did 2 in the church because it wasn't warm enough. All of the rest of them before the pandemic happened in my home, in the living room. And nothing was really formal, but we decided it was better if we had something that pulled the group together on one topic. And the weird thing was that in doing that, people really offshot and talked about their life experiences as it related to whatever we had brought them. So we had a doctor come. We had somebody come who talked to the group about all the medical forms, like a Rep 9 and your do not resuscitate forms and all of that. And those were all handed out. What you need to ask the lawyer about, all of that. We had a Shoning's funeral kind of person come. We learned about a gentleman whose wife died in a restaurant in front of her 2 sons. And they'd gone to the restaurant for Mother's Day. And she died right there in front of the little boys.
It's heavy.
It's heavy. And the guilt the dad felt for not understanding more how to help them, and wanting to now reach out as adults and saying, let's go back. Let's figure this out. We should have done better. And so we've really felt good about where we're at. We have not done Zooms in the pandemic because we really feel you need to be in the room. There has to be a connection. There's almost an electric connection. And we were just starting to open it up. Nobody had died when I started this death cafe. So I have lots of stories now.
Jesus prepared you. He was like, let me give you, I'll get you organized.
Yeah. I'm organized now. In terms of questioning, the questions that we put out, they were different each time. And, but one that I can think of right off the top, being that we were in a religious setting at the church, and because we had people of devout faith, we asked if it was important to have a belief in Jesus and God as you die. Do you think that having a strong faith was important? And that was really interesting because there were people in the group who were not prepared to talk about that. And then others who, of course, said absolutely. And in that group, one of the people that became a guest speaker later was a doctor who talked to them about the amount of people that she'd seen, hundreds in her career, who had died terrible, sad, crying deaths because they thought they were literally going to be gone, that there was nowhere else to go once you died. And that bit of learning for the people at the table, I think, was quite remarkable.
Is your environment open to people who don't have religion?
Yes, for sure. Especially you folks that have had death experiences so young and loss. I think there is great benefit, and that is what we were thinking. So that's just one of the questions, but there were there were many. Should you pre-plan? Should you pre-plan your funeral? Would you be okay being cremated? Are you afraid to die? That was a huge question. Are you afraid to die? I've learned a lot of things listening to some of the stories. There was one of the people told us that she had waited till in her late 40s to marry, and they got married, and her husband died in his sleep a week later. and it was a soulmate kind of situation, and he was gone. She told the story, and then she said, don't waste your life. Enjoy every second. She said, we were only married a week, but I loved every second of it. And I think, yeah, that's good learning.
When should we start to plan for a good death? Where do you even start? Have you heard of a death binder?
I think that as soon as you become aware of that importance, to plan for a good death, as soon as that's is in your psyche, once you're there, it doesn't have to be onerous. I have not gone crazy. I'm not writing 8 hours a day. I have a binder. I kind of divided it into the main ideas in my head. My husband who didn't want to do it at all, has now added his own chapters. And he has a whole game plan that I had no idea of. And I'm so thrilled to know it in case something happens. I have guaranteed him it'll happen, what he wants. And so as soon as you're aware, I think it's important to really help your kids. And that was my goal. Tony and I have already bought a burial plot, and all of the rules and regulations for what we want, because it's out at the lake near the family cabin. We have all that listed for them. There's a photograph. It's in the binder, and we'll certainly take them there, but that's done. In that same topic, we are talking to a couple of funeral homes about the pre-planning of our funerals. Not sure if we'll pay to have them totally paid for, but we are worried about our kids worrying about that. So it may be that we'll prepay for our funerals. But I think the most important part of planning a sort of a death binder is, what is it that you wish? As the mom, I'm actually a stepmom, but as a mom to 3 stepdaughters, what don't you know about me that I need you to know so that I will live a good death? And I gave my husband a heads up because he really didn't want to talk about any of this. And he did think about it long and hard and came to me one morning and said, okay, if you get the computer, can you type and I'm going to talk? And what came out of his mouth, and we are very happily married and very close, I had no idea that was in his head. And those girls will be shocked. I was shocked. And he had directive for me, a directive for each of the girls. And that, for me, is the most precious part. Even though for me, with my mom and dad, planning their funeral was the most precious part because I had quotes, real things to say. But I'm going to give the kids that. But that real, I want to have in the end my favorite painting with me. I will be in one little room. If Dad's still there, I want him with me. Those things are important for those girls to know, and I think that should be upfront. And I guess the last thing is to explain to them not to be frightened. My dad passed away in his home, and I had been called by my mom, and I could tell there was a problem. She was panicked. Took me about 3 minutes, I did speed, to get there. And I was lucky enough, he knew I was there, but he was leaving. He was gone. And even though I'd planned with them, the next 20 minutes was Panic City. Who do I phone first? My husband, you better come, Tony. My brother, you better come. And then there was a lot of things that had to happen that are legal. do we need a coroner? Do we need to phone the funeral home? Though I know those things sound awful and crass, but they are real things, and I don't want our girls in left field. I want them to have at least read it once. There is a go-to. Don't panic. If you don't know what to do, phone the police. They know, and they've dealt with people who have passed away. It's not scary to be in a room, and it's already written for them. It's not scary to be in a room with someone who's passed away, especially someone who's going to live a good death. It's not going to be horrible. So in the binder, I think there has to be a lot of coaching and love for the person it's meant for. If they're going to help you in your last part of your life cycle, then it's important that you support them. In my opinion, it's important to support them through it.
Absolutely. It definitely is. We love to end our segment with the same question for all of our guests. And that question is, what do you love about yourself?
Oh, I just love this interview. What do I love about myself? It's so easy to say what you don't, right? I love that I'm a survivor, that I wasn't sure when this started 2.5 years ago that I'd have the right words, that I'd be strong enough, that my faith in myself and God was going to get me through. Did I have the right friends to help me? I like that I've been honest with my friends and my family, and that through them I survived.
Absolutely, you're a total badass. There's no question. You're not supposed to say that, but you are.
Loneliness transpires, and I've been tried in song while I'm longing without you. Oh, take on my mind is often free, my helplessness for days while I'm longing without you. Take on my mind. Why you moving so fast?